It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hi, this is Andy. I have a special offer for loyal listeners of Accelerate. It's a no-obligation free trial of my zero-time selling interactive online training. Now, I've worked with thousands of sales reps to teach them how to use my zero-time selling to boost their productivity and transform the results. And so if you want to learn the same proven strategies to help you open more doors, have more effective sales conversations with prospects, and close more orders, then my zero-time selling interactive training system is a fit for you. It's incredibly simple to start. Just take out your smartphone and text the word TRUST, that's T-R-U-S-T, to 96,000. Now, do you have your phone ready? Send a text to 96000. That's a 9 and a 6 followed by 3 zeros. Now enter the single word message TRUST and hit send, and you hear right back from me with instructions on how to sign up for your free trial on my zero-time selling interactive training. I look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm very excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Regis Lemmens, professor, author, consultant, speaker, and he focuses on writing about the future of sales. I remember reading a book, a long time ago, written by Neil Rackham. In 1999, I think it was, called Rethinking the Sales Force, Redefining Selling to Create and Capture Customer Value. And to my mind, this is far and away the best book that Neil Rackham ever wrote, better than Spin Selling. I mean, it helped to influence and reshape my views of the changes that the internet and technology we're going to have on selling. And my guest today is writing about that same sort of impetus of change that's coming in selling, and talks about what selling is going to look like in the year 2020 and beyond. And he's going to talk about it today. And welcome, Regis, to the show.
Thank you very much, Andy.
So before we get into that, take a minute and introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and sort of how you got started in this whole sales business.
All right. Well, I come from a different background. I come from the IT background. I started into the IT business, got involved in CRM projects, and evolved in my career from an IT person to a account manager. Ended up in sales, and we wanted to do. We saw there was more demand for consulting and professionalizing the sales forces over here in Europe, and that triggered the idea, why not do a PhD and do some research on the topic? And, I was 32 at the time, and it was time to go back to school and, take a few years off. So I started doing a PhD on sales and sales management, and specifically about key account management, which was really trendy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's nice that you're talking about Neil Rackham, because Neil was actually my external promoter. Uh-huh. He was there when I did my graduation, and he was part of the jury. So it was very exciting to have Neil involved in the project as well.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and while I was doing the PhD, I was contacting quite a lot of organizations who were going through a lot of changes themselves. And many of them actually invited me to use their data, use their organization to do my research. And that's how I ended up being a consultant, because next to my research, of course, they also wanted to change things. So I started helping them out to change, and that's how I set up my own business on the side. And I always make the joke that I teach about sales and sales management, and I use very nice, clean examples, and people go, exciting, back to their offices, start doing it. And then they figure out that it's more difficult than that. And then they contact me, and then I come back as a consultant, really.
Well, that's a good way to set up the gig.
Yeah, that's
we whet your appetite with the research, and then you have to hire me to come make it happen. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great model. So let's start talking about some of the major changes that you foresee coming for the B2B seller. Because I went through some of your material, and you've got some pretty interesting points of view. And maybe we start with this whole idea about, we have this idea of the consultative selling, but you're really envisioning that really becomes much more formalized relationship, and that the customers, in essence, are going to start paying sellers for their business advice.
Yeah, that's how we see the future, basically. Salespeople, we're all about adding more value. Consultative selling was a way to add more value by helping the customer to see how we can solve their problems. And that was really what Neil Rackham was writing about. What we're seeing today is that more and more customers are finding these answers on the internet, are also more educated. So we need to actually step up the game a bit more and go further. And we call this co-creating. We need to actually go and help the customer and really be consultants. And the question is, when you're a consultant, you normally send an invoice after you've seen a customer. So why shouldn't a salesperson send an invoice after he met with the customer? That's a question we pose. So, well, if you really
and what did you survey any customers to find out what they'd say about that?
Well, they were a bit shocked, to be honest. And, so our salespeople and sales managers love it, as you would expect. What we usually say is it doesn't really matter whether you actually invoice or not. As a sales organization, that should be your goal. We should constantly look to set the bar at the level where we could, if we wanted to, invoice our customer, because that's the amount of value that we add when we see them.
Well, that's an interesting point, because one of the things that is problematic, I think, in general, is this idea that frontline salespeople maybe don't have the requisite knowledge to be able to provide that type of value to their prospects, to do this co-creation of value as you talk about. How do you begin to address that I talk about it in my books. I'm a huge believer that we want to put as much expertise and experience into the frontline salesperson as you possibly can, even to the point of sort of moving away from the traditional model of what a salesperson looks like to having them be much more experts in their fields, which, to some sales managers is just, that's heresy, right? Because they think you got to have the hunter as opposed to this, more soft skills.
I think that's perhaps where Europe might be a little bit different from the US, because, in Europe we have many more different smaller countries, each talking their own language. So we don't really have a big one-size-fits-all approach. We always have to, have smaller sales forces which are more focused on customers. So I think here organizing in hunters and farmers and those kind of concepts are more complicated, just because you don't have the scope or the scale of the number of customers like you do have in the US. So you do have to think about languages and cultures here as well.
Sure. But don't you in general, though, sort of think that, I'm talked to a lot of people, obviously, in doing these interviews, that, some thought that this hunter-farmer terminology has really become outdated.
It is outdated, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think even more here in Europe, because of those cultural and because the size of the markets are always smaller, it's also much more difficult to actually implement. It is outdated. Well, what we're seeing actually is more and more when I speak at companies, using the word sales is seen somehow as derogative. I had one occasion where within doing a seminar, I was interrupted and said, I shouldn't refer to the sales force as salespeople anymore. They are business development managers or key account managers. And it kind of shows that we're looking at the role of sales. It's something different. It's really more as a consultant, helping the customer to develop their business, or being, an account manager and managing the relationship. So that's changing. And with that change comes also the fact that the role comes with a lot more content. Like a consultant, we're able to provide much deeper and more advice. Well, what we're also seeing here is that a lot of those companies have said, well, we can't pack all that knowledge into one single, commercial person. We see more and more team-based selling being the approach these days,
right,
where you go as a team to a client, and there you can actually bring quite a lot of knowledge and you can charge for it.
Well, I was going to say, because that certainly is, more costly approach to selling, right? If you're always teaming up to go make the call.
Yes. I think there was one time when I was working on the research in 2011, we came with this idea that we should be able to be really consultants with our customers. And we worked with ING in the Netherlands, the bank, and what ING was saying, well, this is fantastic, but you're creating a longer sales process and you're requiring us to hire more expensive salespeople. somehow at the same time our margins are decreasing. So there's a paradox there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That led to actually in the research say, well, then you should be able to charge for it. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Well, but does it really lead to a longer sales cycle? I mean, part of what I see in my work with companies, I've written about this in my books, is that, and we certainly see this in the research here, at least in the U.S., is that customers want to be able to make decisions faster, right? And that they really feel held back in many respects by the sellers because the sellers aren't bringing that expertise to bear, right? They're not bringing the people with the right knowledge to really do this true consultative sale. But if you do that, then really the net effect should be compressed buying cycles. I say buying cycles on the part of the customer because they'll be able to gather the information they need more quickly and more completely in order to make a decision.
Right, I agree with you, but that's not always the way that customers see it or sales organizations see it. Because they still think in the old-fashioned sales funnel side. And then they say, if we're coming earlier, it's a longer cycle. Which indeed, as you say, it's not true. Because you're coming earlier, you don't go through this whole process as you used to in the past. Because you add value very early on in the process and you're able to start developing business much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
We have a beautiful example here, which I also mentioned in the book, which is a Canadian software company called CGI. And they position themselves, they're a system integrator, and they position themselves as an innovator. They try to differentiate themselves from their competitors by saying, we're the partner that you work with when you want to look for new innovative technologies. And the way they do that is they've organized some sort of a demo center, which they call the Spark Center. And it was great because they had, for instance, 2 years ago, they had the Google glasses there. And if you think about it, how do you sell apps to a bank on Google glasses? What's the problem that you're going to solve for it? I mean, the salespeople didn't know. What they adopted was really a co-creation approach where they invited banks to come and see the glasses, have an experience with it, and then immediately they asked the bank also, how could these glasses make you more competitive in your environment? And surely, but one bank actually came up with a number of ideas, and out of that day, they got an order for 2 apps that they had to develop. This was fantastic because in one day you went from I have absolutely no idea what I could do with this technology with this company, and at the end of the day you had an order already.
Right.
And that's fantastic. And that's also what we call co-creation, which is not just I'm doing something for you, but I'm doing it together with you. The client brings their knowledge, you bring yours, and by having a correct setup to create a good dialogue, which is the demo center in this case, the Spark Center, you can actually create very short sales cycles and really co-create. And the fantastic thing about this, because that's why I talk about it in the book, is that customers really like to come to those centers. And some of them are actually paying CGI to actually come several times a year with the whole innovation department to be inspired.
Sure.
And that's really a fantastic example where a customer is paying to be inspired so that they can actually buy more services from them.
Right.
Projects.
Yeah, I like that idea. So let's take a step back when we talk about hiring people to be able to sell this way, right? I mean, one of the things that I see is, take, for instance, the Challenger sale, which is, certainly deservedly a very popular book here in the United States, because the concept was, to my point of view, was right on, right? This is how this is especially in large complex sales, and I used that methodology long before I knew that methodology existed. I was doing it myself, working for small companies, competing against big companies. That's really how we won, by challenging the customer's paradigm for what they thought the best solution was and helping them sort of reorient the playing field, right, based on our approach. But one of the issues that seem to be with the Challenger is that while it's a great model, in my mind, it's not really scalable because it's very individual, right? Not everybody has those skills to be able to do that. Not everybody has the knowledge to be able to apply the Challenger methodology effectively. So how do you advise companies relative to how they define the skills they're looking for in sales positions?
Well, the advice we give is that don't look for the one person who can do it all. Try to form teams. That's what we see all over here in Europe, is that we see team-based selling happening. So we see product experts, content experts, but also customer experts or industry experts. And by combining those expertises together, you create enough content and knowledge that you are able to challenge or even inspire your customers. So it's all about team-based selling.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to see some of that here in the U.S. from a team-based. Certainly there's a specialization occurring in terms of sales roles, and especially with sort of more inside sales organizations taking shape, where you have your business development reps that are sort of the front line contacts with new prospects, handing over to account exec. So we're seeing some of that, but certainly not, I think, to that extent that you talk about. Now, is this something that you're seeing applied just to sort of the large complex sale, or you're seeing it involved in applied to lots of different product types?
Well, what we do see is a lot of companies are organizing some sort of a matrix structure where you have salespeople specializing in the technology and salespeople specializing in the markets. And depending on the type of customer, either they go together, or if the customer just wants a product, then the product salespeople, the technology people actually close the deal immediately. Mm-hmm. So we see these matrix structures are able to address different types of customers.
Very interesting. Well, good. We'll talk more about that after the break. Sure. Now, before we go into the break, though, I'm going to pose a question for you. This is really a hypothetical scenario, and I ask this question of all my guests. So give you something to think about when we go into the break, and when we come back, we'll get your answer. So here's the hypothetical scenario. You're a new sales manager hired into a company whose sales have stalled and a little bit stagnated, and upper management's really anxious for things to change and turn around. So what two things would you do in the first week that could have the biggest impact? So if you think about that, we'll come back in a minute and we'll get your answer. Hi, this is Andy Paul with my guest Regis Lemmens, and we'll be right back. Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today. Hi, welcome back. My guest today, all the way from Brussels, Belgium, or Antwerp, Belgium, Regis Lemmens, professor, author, speaker, consultant. We're talking about the future of sales. He's written extensively about that. Some great presentations you can see on SlideShare that he's put up there. So let's talk about the scenario I posed before the break. New sales manager hired into a company that needs to be turned around. What two things could you do in the first week that would have the biggest impact?
I often get into that situation. That's usually when companies contact us at university or contact my consulting organization because things aren't going very well anymore and they can't seem to find the answer. Mm-hmm. The two things that we immediately address, so the first thing we immediately start addressing is the market. So, well, something has happened in your market. Your customers have changed. And it's not so much about changing your sales organization, but first understanding what has changed with your clients. And do we still have a value proposition that our customers are interested in? And very often that's where we find the biggest issues. It's that what we're offering is no longer very attractive. Mm-hmm. And they've usually already been changing quite a lot of things in the sales organization themselves. They've usually gone through a lot of trainings. That's usually when they come to me. So we've tried all the different trainings. Perhaps could we try yours as well? And I often tell them that it's probably not a training issue. Probably have to look back at your customers. What are they buying? What are they looking for? And are we really delivering that value?
Right.
So one of the things we often do then is I ask to create a sales organization to each salesperson to pick up two good big customers, and I send them back and they go and interview them. And they ask the customers they tell the customer we're busy with a strategic exercise, which is true, and that we would like their advice and their input. And in that conversation, we're not going to talk about us. We're going to talk about them. And we ask them how they see the future, what their strategies are, and what are their challenges. And usually those discussions last about an hour or two. And then I gather the sales force back, and then we do a workshop where we look at all the answers we got. And based on that, we start drawing out, what are the biggest challenges out there, and how could we, as a sales organization, help our customers with those challenges. Next step is we basically make a report showing, this is the input we got from all our customers. This is what we think we could do. And I ask the sales force to go back and visit all these customers again and show them, look, we got input from you, but we also had input from many other customers. These are the big trends that we see. This is what we think we could do. What do you think? And believe it or not, there are many, many opportunities coming out of those discussions. Customers really appreciate the fact that salespeople usually come to talk to them, not about them, but come to talk about the customer and the customer strategy. Mm-hmm. So appreciate, and a lot of them, there's a feedback we get, is that they really appreciate also to get feedback on what other customers, their peers basically, what are their challenges, and they also appreciate the fact that they're involved in us looking for ways that we can help them. And usually out of those discussions, in the third meeting when I gather the sales force again, I immediately already have real life opportunities that we can start working on.
Yeah, no, and I love the answer because, yes, I've asked this question of more than 100 people, and
yes.
It's funny how many people don't start with the customer. And I think that you gave two steps that both involve starting with the customer, and that's really where the change has to come from.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it was a bit of a long response, but that really works. You involve the customer and you co-create basically your new value proposition or your way of working with customers together with them. It really, really works.
So let me ask a question about, taking from this concept of co-creation is, how do you train people to think this way, right? So let's say you're a business owner, you're manager of a small, medium-sized enterprise, you're an entrepreneur just bringing your product to market for the first time. How do you approach, how do you train your salespeople to say, okay, this is the approach you need to use with the customer for this, to go into this co-creation model? Or what are some of the key things you focus on?
Well, the first thing is it's rather counterintuitive for a lot of salespeople. So what I usually do is I do a small exercise. I do our first workshop with them. I do a small exercise in which I ask them, what are the current trends? What are you seeing today with your clients? And I ask them a question like, think back 5 to 10 years ago. How were your customers then? How are they today? What have you seen? What are the big changes you've seen? And then we have a group discussion, and believe it or not, they all come with the same answer. Customers are not loyal. Customers only want price. Customers have really changed. Mm-hmm. And I use that really as a burning platform, if you like. I say, well, if that's what is happening now, it's only going to increase in the future. So we need to do something differently. And then I present them the concept of co-creation, and I present them a number of cases, how a lot of companies have already started doing that. And that's usually my first step. I create the awareness, like, guys, we need to do something like that. And then the next step is not so much training them, but it's rethinking about how could we do it. It's redesigning the sales process. And I do that again together with them. So we're looking at ways, how could we co-create with our clients? And one of the things to do is, again, the exercise I've just explained is, let's go and talk to customers and see, what are their challenges, what strategically are they trying to achieve, and how could we help them with it? And based on that, we redesign different approaches. So it's more than just skills. It's really redesigning an approach and what we're going to offer. And to give you an example, I was working with another Canadian company that's here in Europe. They're manufacturing paint, which is a commodity. And what we did is we interviewed a lot of customers all around Europe. And what they noticed, and they all came back with, was, a lot of our customers, they see their big projects, their big painting projects, they have moved to Asia because they're less expensive. So our customers have to fill their volume of business with a lot of smaller projects. So they have to find more customers, something they weren't used to. So what we discovered actually, that these customers of theirs don't have the marketing activities or budgets to actually look for those customers. But we do because they were a big company.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, one of our new sales approach was we are going to offer them to organize on their behalf marketing events for their customers to help them to promote business. And believe me, that really works incredibly well. Our salespeople are no longer going to talk about paint and the price of paint. They're going to talk about which marketing activities can we organize and how can we help you to get more business so that you can buy our paint.
That's a good example. So is there, this is an interesting question, I guess, is if you've got sales forces really not accustomed to selling this way, what question should they lead with, right? I mean, oftentimes that's the case. You're trying to teach people to sort of change their mindset and adopt a new set of behaviors. Sometimes they just need that cornerstone question that they should lead with. What's a good question for somebody from a co-creation standpoint when they're doing a discovery call with a customer to sort of slip into that co-creation mode?
I usually give them 4 questions that they should start with. Is the 4 questions I use. I was training a sales force yesterday on it, and the first question is, what are the things that you hear are happening or are coming to your market next year? What are you seeing already happening today? What's changing already with your customers? How do you feel about it? What are the threats and opportunities you see here, and what are you already doing? And these 4 questions actually open up quite a discussion, which is not about me and my products, but about my customer and their challenges in their markets. And it focuses much more the attention towards the customer, what their goals are, what their challenges are, and that opens up avenues for us to see, okay, well, we could perhaps help you with that. So I usually give those 4 questions. What do you hear in your market? What do you see happening already now? How do you feel about it? And what are you doing already about it today? Very often the last one, there's not much answer. They haven't done much today yet. And they're usually very embarrassed about it. But that also opens up the idea or the area of challenges, saying, well, why haven't you done anything? What are you missing to start doing something about it? And this opens the way for a conversation, for a dialogue, and that ends up in a co-creation.
Yeah, and it seems like a good 5th question, if I could be so bold, and to suggest a 5th question is, where do you want to be, in a year from now? Or where do you want to be in 2 years from now? Whatever your sort of near-term planning horizon is, because that's that gap where you're going to be able to help them by co-creating value.
That's correct. Yeah. The only problem sometimes if you ask that question first is that people not always have the answer.
True.
That's when we did our research for the book that we wrote on the future of selling, that was something that we learned. If we ask people, how do you see sales evolve in the next 5 to 10 years, they can't answer that question. You get very, very basic answers that you would have expected.
Oh yeah, no, that's why I framed it within a year or 2, right? So I think every business has a vision for where they're going to be in a year, right? Yeah. If they don't, they're operating without a plan, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's oftentimes that gap between where they envision they want to be as a result of the plan and where they are operating in today, because they really don't have a plan, right?
Yes.
So, well, good. So another question for you then is, how do you think about sales from an academic standpoint? And one of the topics I talk about more and more these days is productivity. So how do you define productivity from a sales perspective?
Well, that's a good question. Gosh, Andy, you got me.
Well, let me give you where I'm coming from is that part of the problem is everybody talks about, we're going to improve sales productivity. And I think that what I see is that companies really are fooling themselves because they confuse performance with productivity, right? I can have somebody sell more, but their basic productivity, if we define it in sort of classic economic terms, which is rate of output for a certain unit of input, hasn't changed at all. And to me, at the end of the day, sales productivity is about how many dollars of revenue you can generate per hour of time that's actually selling time, right? Time in front of customers or connected with customers. And I think this co-creation model actually is a very interesting tool that perhaps really could drive improvements in sales productivity in terms of what return you get for the hour you invest of selling time.
Yes. Yes. Well, yeah. I see where you're going now with the question. Well, one of the things that we're looking at much more now is looking at how much dialogue do you generate between us and our customers. And it's not just about how much sales we've generated, but how many relationships have we developed? Who are we talking to? How is value created with them? And then later on, we know that value will generate into dollars. I'm working now with a university actually who wants to be much more commercial, and they have salespeople to sell courses to companies.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we're now doing is we're changing that model because it's not really working anymore. We can't get appointments, so we're changing it to a co-creation model. And what we're doing there is all the salespeople have to choose an area, a sector on which they want to focus on, and that's also an area on which we do research. Like, for instance, the energy department is an area that the university does research on. So what they need to do now, that's their strategy, is they need to map out that sector, identify all the key stakeholders, and start building relationships with them, help our researchers to get access to these companies, do research together with them, and while they're doing that, also position us as an organization that can provide training to them. So it's less about selling directly, it's more about creating relationships and a dialogue which will make sure that the day that company needs training, they will automatically think about us.
Right.
And so in terms of KPIs, we're starting to look here in this project much more about number of relationships, the intensity of the relationship, how much are we working with all these companies, how much research are we getting out of it, because even if that's not what we're selling, it's still value for the university as well. And we've also relabeled these salespeople as business developers.
Mm-hmm.
You need to develop a market and develop the business in that market as a whole. So it's much more than sales. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's really what we're looking at the moment.
It does, in a way. I mean, it's an interesting perspective. We may get back together and explore that. Maybe offline, as we'll have another conversation. So, all right, we're going to move into the last segment of the show here. I've got some rapid-fire questions for you that you can give me one-word answers, or you can elaborate as you choose. So, you ready?
Yes.
So, what's the most powerful sales tool you have in your arsenal?
Design thinking. Design thinking, because I don't know if you had a look at it. It's a methodology to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
And in Europe, all companies, they're interested in innovation. So if, as a salespeople, go contact companies, talk about innovation, talk about helping them to innovate, and design thinking is a methodology that will help you to do that. Definitely advise all salespeople, look into it. It's the next sales methodology or the next sales tools that we're going to use.
All right. I'm on it. Design thinking. What's one tool you use for your own sales management that you can't live without?
I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's Excel.
Don't be embarrassed. Lots of people say that.
Yeah.
Who's your sales role model?
Who's my sales role? You know it's Neil Rackham.
Okay.
It's Neil Rackham, and exactly for the same reasons you said earlier. I love the fact that rethinking the sales pulse was great. When he was my promoter for my thesis, I was at a seminar in which he actually opened up and says, you know what? When we developed spin selling, it was based on the fact that the products we made in Europe and in the US were not that good. So people had a lot of problems. But if you think about today, all our products and services are pretty good. So why should the customer change products and go for you? So we need a new sales methodology that looks into that, which basically leads to challenger sales. It leads to more co-creation. And that was really my role model. He inspired me, and that's why I started this research.
Yeah, well, I think co-creation speaks specifically to what he talked about. Rackham talked about in the modern American sales force, or the modern sales force, is that, his primary points there is that if the channel can't provide something of value to the buyer, then they don't need the channel. And so, we've seen all these product types where the sales force has basically been taken out of the middle, or disintermediated, as I like to say. Yeah. When's the last time you saw a salesperson selling pencils, or for instance, right? As an example, an extreme example. Yes. So that book really foresaw what was going to occur with the power of the internet to be able to provide a level of value that if salespeople can't exceed the level of value that people can get online, they don't need the salesperson.
That's correct. Yeah.
So
we even see this happening even more. If you look at a lot of the HubSpots, the inbound marketing,
right.
all of those tools, and we look at the research that is happening on that level, I anticipate there's even more consultative selling going to happen online. So we as a sales force, we need to go much more into the strategies of our customers rather than just solving their problems. I think it's not going to last very long anymore.
Right. Well, I think that's a great point. That's, you talk about getting into their strategies versus solving their problems. You're looking at what their objective and their vision is as opposed to just what do I need to fix right now.
Yeah.
All right. What's one book every salesperson should read?
From selling to co-creating. I have to give you that answer because that's my book, of course.
All right. Well,
let's take another one.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I think Challenge Sale at this stage is a very good one. I just noticed they had the second book coming out, so I'm looking forward to read it.
The Challenger Buyer, right?
Yes. Another book, and this is perhaps something completely different, but I'm looking into books like This is Service Design Thinking, which you might argue has nothing to do with sales, but it's about design thinking and how to create value through a service. And believe it or not, but we as sales organizations, we deliver services to our clients.
Sure.
So how can we add more value to it? I must admit that most of the books I read are not sales related because I look for inspiration outside the field of sales.
So is there a particular book on design thinking?
Yeah, This is Service Design Thinking. That's the title. It's a bit long, but that's really a bestseller. It's a very good book on design thinking.
And who's the author?
Mark. Yeah, I'll have to look at it. I'm sorry, I'm not good at names. It's not just in front of me. I'll just look online while I'm talking to you, of course.
While you do that, I'll give you the next question. So, what's your favorite music to listen to?
Wait.
I'm sorry, spell the last name?
No, I was going to say that there's two books. This is Service Design Thinking. It's definitely one book to read. The other one, that's the thing. There's 23 authors actually of this book.
Oh.
There's one author that was the lead one, is Mark, and his last name escapes at the moment. But there's 23 design thinkers all around Europe. A lot of them in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands and the Nordic countries are very good in this approach. And they all came together to write this book, and it's really worthwhile looking at.
Okay, we'll put that title on our website so when this episode's published, people can reference that. So the other question for you is, what's your favorite music to listen to pump yourself up before an important sales call?
I'm embarrassed to say that because it's Genesis. I think it shows my age.
Well, hey, lots of people said AC/DC, so that's okay.
Yeah, okay, all right, then it's fine. In my case, it's Genesis, and it's true. I have it on my iPhone, and I listen to it in the car on the way to a customer. Yeah,
I love it. So, what's the first sales activity you do every day?
Check my emails and check my social media.
Okay, last question for you. What's the question you get asked most frequently by salespeople?
It's mainly about how to differentiate myself, how to add more value, how to make sure that it's not a price discussion. That's what I hear constantly. Mm-hmm. How to make a difference in price.
Excellent. And your answer is?
Co-create. We need a different approach then.
Love it. Okay. Well, good. Well, I want to thank you for joining me. My guest today has been Regis Lemmens. He's a professor at Solvay Business School in Brussels, CEO of Sales Cube, a sales consulting company, author of a book. Well, why don't you tell us about the name of your book again and tell people where they can find out more about you.
Well, the name of the book is called From Selling to Co-Creating. You can find more about the book on Amazon.com. Go on SlideShare, and if you look me up, Regis Lemmens, or if you look up Sales 2020, which was the name of the research project which led to the book, you'll find some PowerPoint presentations and some material that explains a little bit the concepts and the ideas that we're working on.
Good.
And
yeah.
You can always visit our websites on salescubes.com.
Excellent. Yeah, I recommend people do that. So remember, everybody, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate the pace of your business growth. Subscribing to this podcast on iTunes is certainly an excellent way to do that. Make sure that you don't miss any of our conversations with top business experts like our guest today, Regis Lemmens, who share their experience and wisdom about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.